It's July 7th, 2023, and this is Rights in Russia's monthly interview. Today, we welcome Nataliya Sekretareva, a Russian human rights lawyer who works as head of the legal team at the Memorial Human Rights Defense Center. Before that, she worked as a lawyer at the Memorial Human Rights Center until its dissolution in April 2022. She's worked for the Institute for Public Law and Policy, a civil society organization based in Moscow, the Moscow Helsinki Group, and the Eurasia Partnership Foundation based in Yerevan, Armenia. She's also interned with the UN agencies for refugees in Armenia. Nataliya is a graduate of the Lomonosov Moscow State University Faculty of Law and has an advanced LLM in international criminal law from the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. Welcome to Rights in Russia, Nataliya.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here. I mentioned in my introduction that you are a human rights lawyer, and I'm wondering, how did you come to take up this work, and what inspired you?
I think that this question is the hardest one, and I think that everyone is kind of inclined to say how this beautiful path led them to this beautiful job, but I don't think that it was such a conscious choice. I never wanted to do something that would be soul breaking, making deals between two big corporate sharks eating each other. So, and I think I had the courage and the privilege of kind of going into underpaid nonprofit world, and here I am.
So here you are, currently head of the legal team at the Memorial Human Rights Defense Center. And then, as I mentioned, you were previously with the Memorial Human Rights Center that was closed down in 2022, at the same time as the International Memorial Society. So could you say a little bit to clarify about the network of different memorial organizations?
Yes, I would love to, especially since I think that it's kind of a question that will never be solved, as a what was first, the chicken or an egg. So basically, Memorial is it's a movement, and it consists of dozens of organizations all over Russia and now also all over the world. There are a bunch of memorials in Europe. There is Memorial Israel. So it's not even just Europe. So if we talk about Russian memorials, you still have quite a bunch of memorials in different regions of Russia who might do just history work or who might do history work and human rights work. But you had two big, strong Moscow-based organizations, which were International Memorial, which historically specialized in the work on commemorating the victims of Soviet political repressions, and the Human Rights Center Memorial, which was historically specialized in the human rights work. And then when both of them got disbanded by the government, some of the people who worked with the Human Rights Center Memorial didn't want to stop. We didn't want it to be the end when the government tells us that this is the end. So what we did is we got together and founded a new organization, and as if we wanted to make our lives hard, we named it Memorial Human Rights Defense Center. just to add to the confusion. And basically what we do is we preserved most of the mandate of the Human Rights Center Memorial. So the work that we do kind of builds on what the old memorial was doing, but of course we consider ourselves a new entity. We have some new people. Some of the people did not stay with us, and then we have a new management team. We had new elections of the board. So in some ways, it is a new organization.
Mm-hmm. And do you have access to the archives of the older organization?
Depends on which. The archives again. Like one more question that just kind of like blows everyone's minds, because depends on which archives do you talk about, because you have international memorial archives, which have to do with the political repressions in the Soviet Union, and then this is a totally another organization, and we don't have anything to do with it. And if we talk about our work, it really depends, because we didn't how do I formulate it? Like our work created content, and we of course preserved this content. For example, my team used to be called kind of like European Court of Human Rights litigation team. So of course we have to preserve the documents that we submitted, that we received from the European Court, to continue the work on particular cases. In this way, yes, we preserved it.
Mm-hmm. And the organizations that were closed down, say the Human Rights Center and the International Memorial Society, what were the legal grounds for closing them down? And was it a real judicial proceeding, or was it more of a political decision?
I mean, I would start with the easy one, that if you talk about judicial proceedings in Russia, you should bear in mind that courts are not free. They haven't been free for many, many years, and the more it goes, the worse it gets. So, of course, you don't have justice in Russia. Even now, even if not, even if it's not a political case, it's just falling apart. Like when the system starts rotting, it's rotting everywhere. So no, it was not proper judicial proceedings as you might mean it in the United States. But the formal basis of the liquidation judgments was that both organizations violated the law of foreign agents, because both of them, Human Rights Center in 2014, International Memorial in 2016, were added in a list of the so-called NGOs performing the functions of foreign agents. It's a very repressive law in Russia that is used now against NGOs, not NGOs, other legal entities, physical persons. So any person can be a foreign agent, unregistered organizations, everyone basically can be a foreign agent for no reason other than descending with the government, at least on something. So under this law, you have an obligation to label your materials as emanating from a foreign agent. And back in 2019, both organizations received a bunch of fines on the failure to label their materials properly online. And then 2 years later, suddenly the prosecution decided that this is grave and unrectifiable breaches of Russian law, and these organizations have to be liquidated, because they didn't put that, on some of the websites and social media, they didn't put a disclaimer like, oh, Memorial International is inscribed in a list of foreign agents. No, no, no. Just for this formal reason, the organizations were liquidated, and the law is completely unconstitutional, anti-human rights. But the bizarre part is that by the moment when they were liquidated, all these materials were labeled. So there was no, even like, all the materials were labeled, all the fines were paid. Not that it matters, but even this was done. So yes, of course, it was a political decision. It was quite ridiculous. And I think a really good moment that shows how political it was is, I mean, everything does, but a really good moment came up in a last hearing in the International Memorial Dissolution case in the Supreme Court, when at the closing statements, the representative of the prosecution started talking about how International Memorial is falsifying history, how it's glorifying the enemies of the state, which didn't have anything to do with the subject matter of the case. And everyone was like, I remember that there were a lot of visitors in the court hearing, and they were like, are we in the Soviet Union now? And then the best part is that, like, this beat was quoted in a judgment. So what propaganda does now is that, like, it doesn't have anything to do with the subject matter the case. But what propaganda does now is that they say, oh yes, international memorial that was closed down for falsifying history and glorifying enemies of the state and like Nazi collaborators, which is not even true, but it doesn't matter anymore.
It doesn't. So since the organizations were closed down, what has happened to Memorial's members? All of the people that were associated with Memorial, the volunteers that worked for them. So what have they been doing?
That's quite a hard question because some of the people decided to change their lives and do something else, and thanks God, as far as I'm aware, nothing bad happened in their lives. Then some of the people kept doing what they've been doing. For example, me, I was working as a lawyer. I keep working as a lawyer inside of the same team, and I'm quite happy with what I'm doing. And then some people stayed, some people left. Actually, in Memorial, if you look at the overall Memorial movement, quite a lot of people stayed. I would say that the minority so far left the country. And then some people left the country because they faced the threats of criminal prosecutions, and some people are facing criminal prosecutions. For example, now you have at least 3 criminal cases initiated against Memorial members, which are related to their work. Then there are a bunch of criminal cases initiated against volunteers or Memorial people who used to be associated with old memorials, not based on their work with Memorial, but based on their views. For example, anti-war like a person participated in an anti-war protest, or there is one former volunteer who is arrested on the so-called fake news charges. Just to clarify what is fake news charges, that in Russia, in last March, in Russia adopted a really restrictive censorship, wartime censorship, which criminalizes first discreditation of Russian armed forces, whatever it means, and the second, spreading false information about Russian armed forces. But what is false information? Any information about them doing anything wrong. So it's very, very harsh, and you're facing up to 15 years in prison under these charges. So it's really serious matter. So if we go into our criminal cases against the Memorial members that are related more or less to their work, it's of course we have Oleg Orlov, co-chairman of the Memorial Human Rights Defense Center, who is facing charges of repeatedly discrediting Russian armed forces. Then you have a case against the Memorial International staff on the so-called rehabilitation of Nazism, because and this case is based on the fact that in the online database of the victims of Soviet political repressions, the authorities allegedly found the names of the people who allegedly collaborated with the German occupational power during the World War II. And for this reason, because they are collaborators and because their names are in the online database and can be found in this database, the authorities qualified it as a basically glorification of the crimes of Nazi Germany. I'm not saying that it's not insane. I'm just like kind of right now stating the facts as insane as they are, like no comments. And the third criminal case is against Memorial Perm Memorial members. There is a city in Russia called Perm. It's a regional capital, and there used to be a memorial office there. And this criminal case is very, very tricky as well, because it's people are charged with attempted contraband of cultural property. And the authorities decided that internal paperwork of Memorial Perm, which was also closed down by the government, is cultural property. So basically, the paperwork included internal emails printed out, email letters to the government, grant applications, grant reports. Like there was nothing historical there. It was just like a paperwork of an organization. But since Memorial is kind of obsessed with history, it's kind of our thing. For people who used to work in Per Memorial, it was extremely important as part of institutional memory because we are so like involved, like we care so much about even our own institutional history to preserve it for the future that of course for them it was super important, but to say that it's cultural property and that by sending it from Moscow or from Perm to Moscow you are committing some kind of crime is completely bizarre. But nevertheless, one person is now in pre-trial detention on these charges and he's facing up to 8 years in prison for this. So it's very, very complicated.
Yes. I wonder if we can go back to Oleg Orlov and you could say a little bit more about the charges against him and what's been happening in the trial proceedings so far.
Yes, Oleg Orlov is charged with the repeated discreditation of Russian armed forces. What it means, because like when you say it, it's like you cannot understand what kind of crime is it. It means that any kind of criticism of Russia, of decisions or actions of Russian armed forces is considered discreditation. Because you kind of like attack the prestige of Russian armed forces and it's bad for the state. So for the first time, you receive an administrative fine. For the second time, it's going to be a crime. So Oleg, at the beginning of the full-scale armed invasion of Ukraine, Oleg went to the streets more than, I think he went totally for 7 times. He did his like one-man protests 7 times, but he received 2 administrative penalties for discreditation with his posters. And for example, one of the administrative offenses that he committed is that he stood on a red square with a poster that said, freedom to Russia, peace to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And then the repeated discreditation was his Facebook post, where he posted a Russian translation of an op-ed that he published in a French newspaper. And the title of this article is "They wanted fascism, they got it," which means that like he basically what he does in the article is he says how destructive this war, this armed conflict is being and will be for Russian civil society, for Russia as a state, for human rights in Russia. And based on this, the government is criminally prosecuting him, and now he is facing up to 3 years in prison. The trial is ongoing. There has been 2 court hearings so far. The next one is scheduled for 21st of July 2023. And yeah, it's real.
And can you tell us what you expect the outcome of the trial to be? I mean, is there a chance that he will get a lesser penalty because he's very prominent? He's such a prominent person.
Yeah, it's very tricky because the old rules, which were not like proper rules, but kind of like rules of the game, don't work anymore. So a year ago, I would say yes, he will receive a fine or a provisional sentence, 100%, because even under Russian criminal code, with this kind of offense, if you're a first-time offender, you don't receive prison sentence. But we see that it just like this logic just doesn't work anymore. And the logic is more like, are you like, why he has this criminal case? Because they want to silence him, and they obviously want him to leave the country because the voice from inside of the country has way more weight than the voice from the outside of the country, unfortunately. And this is the tragedy, that like people outside have all kinds of opportunities to talk, but their voice just has little like way less value. So they want, like, the authorities clearly wanted Oleg to leave the country, but he didn't. Then the next step is that you can see how you conduct the court proceedings. Do you push that you're right, that you had the right to do this? Do you keep criticizing and raising your voice or not? He does these things. He is not giving up. He says what he thinks. He's been super, how do I, like, not gentle, but he's not being aggressive, but it's like in Russia, just to show that you believe that you are right, that you believe in your rights, is enough to say that you are provoking the government. So we are expecting any kind of results. And Oleg's attorney is warning him that she also thinks that anything can happen. And he, for example, I'm tending to be a bit more optimistic, but we think that as a as a as a legal team, I would say that we think that the prison sentence is very likely.
Oh, that's so unfortunate. And I in that context, and we've been talking about, you know, all of the bad things that have been happening in Russia, right? So I'm wondering if you're seeing any positive developments that can counteract some of this gloominess.
I don't know. I think that it really depends on who you're talking to, and I think for me the glass is always half empty. But you can see that, for example, people are thirsty for a little bit of air. And you can even see that Oleg's trial, for example, he had two hearings, and in the second hearing, we were questioning witnesses, the prosecution witnesses, and one of the witnesses was the author of an expert report that said that the linguistics expert report that said that his article, his Facebook posts discredited Russian armed forces. And like, this is a separate topic to talk about how bizarre it is. But one thing they did in this report is that they said that by using stereotypes, Oleg is undermining the authority of the Russian armed forces. And one of the stereotypes that they deduced was that the state should be governed by people on the right side of the force. And then they made the link to Star Wars. And then, like, kind of like, we started asking the expert about Star Wars, like what was that during the trial. Then she called Jedis DJ, and then like it became so viral. And like, even like this online, for example, reaction to this, that people, first of all, people need hope. Like, people don't only need martyrs, people need hope, people need to see something positive in anything, in all of this that is happening. And so, for example, now I'm like, okay, I'll use this platform to remind that we're inviting George Lucas to comment on this case. Like, we need the fourth to be with us. And so, for example, all the media started sharing, like, George Lucas, please come, like, we need you, we're talking about jazzies or DJs, we don't know. And like, how, like, by the virality of this, you can see how people just need some air. And in this way, Russia is not going anywhere. And states have been, like, a lot of societies went through really, really bad things. I think that we are going to go through even worse things. Things are going to be really, really bad, but like, Russia is not going anywhere, and something will come out.
And sort of for human rights, more generally, how do you see the future of the human rights community in Russia, which is small but vibrant? And what about the future of human rights in Russia just overall?
Again, I think that in the near future, things are just gonna go worse and worse and worse and worse. It's really, really, like, for example, I've been at one round table. I think it's a very telling example. I've been at one round table dedicated to one, like, human rights topic recently. And at this round table, I think 70% of the time was dedicated not to this topic, but to, like, okay, where do we get money not to close down? Okay, like we don't know anything, like if we can function in 6 months from now, like everything is in a really big crisis. And for example, yeah, like a lot of organizations are on a brink of closing down, and you have all these administrative issues that no one wants to see people with Russian passports. It's impossible to transfer money to Russia, and in Russia, it's impossible to fundraise because everyone is afraid. But as Russian society is not going anywhere, it's like the biggest country in the world, and it's like you just choose either you want it to be like a dark hole of I don't know what, or which would be bad for the whole international community. Like if things are bad in such a big part of the world, like things are gonna influence you, it's gonna backfire, like environmentally, all kinds of stuff. So, in this same way, Russia is full of, and the human rights society is small but vibrant, and people are not intending to give up. Like things are really, really hard, but people believe in their values. It's probably we're gonna get weaker, but I'm sure that we're not gonna disappear. And when there will be a window for change, some kind of opening for change, we're gonna be there.
Well, that's a good note to end on, I think. And so I just want to thank you, Nataliya, for all that you've done, your years of work on human rights protections, and for taking the time today to be on our program, because I know you're very busy.
My pleasure.
We very much appreciate it, and we also are hoping for better years to come, and wish you the very best.
Yeah.
Thank you.